Please, just pretend to be with me for a moment, Emily whispered, clutching the arm of a man she had never met before. Her ex was walking straight toward her, his smirk sharp enough to cut through the crowd, and panic left her no choice. What she didn't know was that the stranger she leaned on wasn't just anyone. He was a billionaire whose presence would change her life in ways she could never have imagined. Before we dive in, please take a moment to like this video and don't forget to comment where you're watching from. We'd love to know that. The chandeliers above the ballroom shimmered like falling stars, casting a golden glow over the sea of expensive gowns and tailored tuxedos. Emily Carter stood at the edge of the room, clutching her glass of champagne so tightly her fingers trembled. She had told herself this would be a chance to network, to finally show that she belonged in a room filled with New York's elite. But as soon as she spotted him, her ex-boyfriend, Mark Benson, her entire plan began to unravel. Mark's smug grin cut through the crowd like a knife. He hadn't changed. His expensive suit and overconfident stride reminded Emily of the man who had nearly crushed her spirit when he walked away, leaving her reputation in pieces. The last thing she wanted was to hear his mocking voice again, reminding her of how she wasn't good enough, of how he had traded up when he left her. Tonight was supposed to be about fresh starts, but with him here, the air felt suffocating. Her heart pounded in her chest as she searched for an escape, but the only doors were blocked by servers carrying trays of champagne and guests locked in conversation. Mark was getting closer, weaving through the crowd, his eyes fixed on her like prey he couldn't wait to corner. Emily's pulse raced. She whispered under her breath, "Not tonight. Please, not tonight." In a desperate blur, her gaze landed on the man standing just a few feet away. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a perfectly fitted black suit. His dark hair swept back neatly, and an air of calm authority surrounded him, even though he seemed completely alone. Without thinking, Emily crossed the room, set her glass down on a nearby table, and slipped her arm through his. "Please," she whispered quickly, her voice shaking. "Pretend you're with me." The man didn't flinch. He glanced at her with steady, deep-set eyes that reflected surprise for only a heartbeat before softening into something else. Understanding. He straightened his posture and, without missing a beat, placed his hand gently over hers. "There you are," he said smoothly, his voice warm but commanding, the kind of tone that instantly drew attention. "I was starting to think you'd left me alone here." Emily blinked at him, startled by how naturally the words flowed from his mouth, as though he had known her all along. Around them, several heads turned, and even Mark, who had been seconds from approaching, stopped dead in his tracks, his smirk faltering. Emily forced a smile, trying to play along, though her nerves rattled every bone in her body. For the first time that evening, she felt shielded, as if this stranger's presence created an invisible wall between her and the man who had once hurt her so deeply. "Thank you," she murmured softly, only for him to hear. The stranger tilted his head slightly, his eyes studying her as if weighing her truth. Then he gave her the smallest nod, a silent promise that he wasn't about to let her face the night alone. Emily had no idea who he was, no clue that this man standing by her side would change her life in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. All she knew was that in this moment, he had become her escape. The room seemed to shift as Emily clung to the stranger's arm, her nerves still sparking like electricity under her skin. For a moment she thought he might let go, reveal that she had made a mistake by pulling him into her mess. But instead, he leaned closer, his voice calm and reassuring as though they had known each other for years. "You look tense," he murmured softly, just enough for her ears. "Don't worry. Whoever you're running from, he won't get past me." Emily's breath caught. She hadn't realized how obvious her fear had been, But this man, this stranger, had read it instantly. She gave him a small, grateful smile, even as her mind raced. Who was he? Why would someone like him step in so easily for a woman he didn't know? Mark, standing a few feet away, was visibly unsettled now. His smirk was gone, replaced by a tight jaw and narrowed eyes. He glanced at the man beside Emily, seemed to think twice about approaching, and finally turned away, retreating to another group of guests. Relief flooded through Emily, but the weight of her decision to grab onto a stranger suddenly hit her. She had no idea who he was, or what kind of story she'd just dragged herself into. "Sorry," she whispered quickly, her cheeks flushing. "I didn't mean to. It's just, my ex was—" The man raised a hand gently, cutting her off without rudeness. "You don't owe me an explanation," he said with a small smile. "But since you've introduced me to the room as your date, I suppose I should at least tell you my name. I'm Alexander Grant." The name hit her harder than she expected. Emily blinked in surprise, her mind racing as if she'd heard it somewhere before. And then it clicked. Alexander Grant, the billionaire CEO of Grant Enterprises, the man whose face had graced the cover of every financial magazine she had skimmed at the office. A man whispered about in boardrooms as brilliant, untouchable, and intimidating. Her stomach flipped. She had clung to him, a man who had the power to buy and sell half the companies in that ballroom. But Alexander didn't seem fazed by her shock. Instead, he guided her toward the corner of the room where the music softened, giving them a small bubble of space away from curious eyes. "Relax," he said gently, watching her expression. "I'm not going to bite. And tonight you don't have to face him alone." Emily's heart ached with something she hadn't felt in years: safety. It was strange, even reckless, to trust a man she had just met, especially one with his kind of reputation. But the steadiness in his eyes told her he wasn't here to humiliate her. In fact, his presence made her feel seen. Still, she couldn't help but laugh nervously. Of all the people in this room, I had to grab the one man everyone knows by name. Alexander chuckled, the sound low and warm. Sometimes fate works in strange ways. As the music swelled, he extended his hand to her. "If we're going to keep up this little act, we might as well make it convincing. May I have this dance?" Emily hesitated, her mind screaming at her to say no, to walk away before she made a fool of herself. But her heart, still thundering from the near encounter with Mark, told her yes. Slowly she placed her hand in his, and Alexander led her onto the dance floor. Whispers rippled instantly across the room. The mysterious, untouchable CEO dancing with a woman no one seemed to recognize. Guests craned their necks, curiosity flashing in their eyes. Mark glared from the corner, his jaw clenched. Emily swallowed hard, nerves mixing with something else, a flutter she couldn't quite control. Alexander's hand was firm, yet gentle at her waist, guiding her effortlessly across the floor. He leaned close, his voice smooth. "Don't worry about them. Right now, it's just you and me." And as the music carried them, Emily realized she had stumbled into something far bigger than a simple escape from her ex. She was standing in the arms of a man who lived in a world far beyond hers, a man whose gaze made her forget the chaos around her. And she couldn't shake the feeling that this night was only the beginning. The music swelled through the ballroom, a soft, romantic melody that seemed to hush every conversation as Alexander and Emily moved across the floor. She had expected the spotlight to feel unbearable, but instead, she found herself caught in a strange calm, almost as if his steady presence shielded her from the sea of curious eyes. Every step he guided was smooth and sure, as though he had done this 1,000 times before, yet his focus remained fixed on her, making her feel like she was the only woman in the world. Emily's heart raced, not from the dance itself, but from the realization that she was standing in the arms of a man whose name carried power across America. She couldn't help but whisper nervously, "They're all staring." Alexander leaned in, his voice low and reassuring, the kind of tone that carried warmth without losing strength. "Let them. Half of these people spend their lives wishing for something real. Tonight they just happen to be jealous because you found it before they did." Her cheeks flushed, and for the first time that evening, Emily smiled, genuinely, without forcing it. But as she glanced across the room, her eyes locked with Mark's. He stood frozen, his drink untouched, his glare sharp enough to cut glass. He couldn't accept what he was seeing. Emily, the woman he had once dismissed so easily, now twirling gracefully with a billionaire whose presence commanded the room. Emily felt a pang of satisfaction she hadn't expected. Not revenge, not pride, but a quiet, liberating sense that she didn't need to shrink anymore. Still, doubts gnawed at her. When the music softened and Alexander slowed their steps, she whispered, "Why are you doing this for me?" "You don't even know me." Alexander's eyes searched hers, steady and unwavering. "Because I know what it feels like to walk into a room and feel like you don't belong. And because—" His words trailed off, replaced by a small, thoughtful smile. "Sometimes you just follow your instincts." Her breath caught, but before she could respond, the applause at the end of the song filled the ballroom. Guests clapped politely, some out of admiration, others out of disbelief. Emily stepped back, but Alexander didn't release her hand. Instead, he guided her off the dance floor, past the murmurs, and toward the balcony overlooking the glittering skyline. The cool night air brushed against her skin, a welcome relief after the heat of so many stairs. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "You must think I'm ridiculous," she said softly. "Dragging you into this, pretending like we're—" "Emily," he interrupted gently, his voice carrying the kind of authority that wasn't harsh, but firm enough to make her listen. "You don't need to explain yourself to me. Whatever reason you had, you don't owe me an apology." Her name on his lips sent a strange shiver through her. How had she told him her name? She didn't remember. Maybe someone had whispered it earlier in the ballroom. Maybe he had overheard, but the way he said it felt personal. For a long moment they stood there in silence, the city lights glittering below them like fallen stars. And then Alexander spoke again, his tone quieter now. "You're stronger than you think. That man inside, your ex, he only has power over you if you let him. But from what I've seen tonight, you've already taken it back." Emily swallowed hard, tears stinging at the corners of her eyes. She turned her face away, embarrassed by her emotions, but Alexander gently tilted her chin back toward him. His touch was light, respectful, but enough to ground her in the moment. It was then that she realized this wasn't just a kind gesture anymore. Something deeper had sparked between them, something she couldn't ignore. And from the way Alexander looked at her, as though she was more than just another face in the crowd, she knew he felt it too. But just as the silence between them threatened to become something more, the doors to the balcony swung open. Mark's voice cut through the night, sharp and bitter. "Quite the performance, Emily. But let's not pretend for a second that you belong in his world." The sting of his words hit like ice, but Emily didn't move. For once, she didn't shrink. Because this time, she wasn't standing alone. Alexander's jaw tightened as he turned toward Mark, his eyes darkening with a calm intensity. "Careful," he said evenly. "You're one step away from saying something you'll regret." Mark scoffed, but there was hesitation in his stance, the first crack in his arrogant armor. And in that moment, Emily realized that this night was no longer about escaping her past. It was about stepping into something entirely new, something terrifying yet exhilarating, something that might change the course of her life forever. The moment Mark stepped onto the balcony, the easy warmth of the night shattered. Emily's pulse quickened, her instincts urging her to retreat, but Alexander's steady grip on her hand anchored her in place. He didn't move, didn't flinch, and that unwavering presence gave her a strength she hadn't realized she still had. Mark's smirk curled into something colder. "Emily?" he sneered, his tone laced with mockery. "I see you've upgraded. From begging for my attention to clinging onto a man who has no idea who you really are." His words, sharp and deliberate, were meant to humiliate her in front of the one person who had given her dignity back. For a split second, Emily's old self, the girl who had endured too many insults, nearly surfaced. But before the doubt could swallow her, Alexander stepped forward, his voice carrying the kind of calm authority that silenced even the whispers drifting from the ballroom. "Careful," he said, his gaze unyielding. "Insults say more about the man throwing them than the woman standing here." The statement hit harder than Emily expected. Guests who had followed out to the balcony exchanged looks, their murmurs buzzing through the crowd like sparks. For the first time, Mark looked unsettled, his arrogance faltering beneath the weight of Alexander's composure. Emily, heart pounding, found her voice, shaky, but growing steadier with each word. "You don't get to do this anymore, Mark. You don't get to tear me down just because you're uncomfortable seeing me move on." Her chest tightened, but her words felt like a release, as though years of silence were unraveling all at once. Mark chuckled dryly, trying to reclaim control. "Move on?" "With him?" His eyes narrowed at Alexander, dripping with disbelief. "Do you even know who you're talking to, Emily? He doesn't belong in your world." Emily froze, unsure of what he meant, but Alexander's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. "That's the irony," he replied, his tone razor-sharp yet controlled. "You think you're the one holding all the cards, but you've been playing the wrong game this entire time." Gasps rippled through the crowd. People began whispering, some recognizing Alexander, others piecing together the clues. The realization that the mysterious man Emily had clung to wasn't just a stranger, but the billionaire CEO whose company towered over the city, spread like wildfire. Mark's face drained of color, his arrogance cracking into panic. You're... His words trailed off, strangled by disbelief. Alexander didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. "I am Alexander Reed," he said evenly, the name rolling off his tongue with quiet finality. "And tonight, I chose to stand by her. That's all that matters." The crowd erupted with hushed excitement, phones discreetly raised to capture the moment, their curiosity feeding off the clash of power and pride. Emily, stunned by the revelation, turned to look at Alexander, her heart thundering with confusion and awe. She had come here expecting a night of dread, a confrontation with the man who once broke her spirit. Instead, she now stood beside one of the most powerful men in the city, who had defended her without hesitation, not because of her past or her status, but because he saw her worth when no one else had. For the first time that evening, Emily no longer felt like the broken woman left behind by her ex. She felt seen, protected, and, against all odds, valued. But just as the moment seemed to steady, Mark's fury returned, his pride refusing to let go. "This isn't over," he spat, his words trembling with desperation. "You think this saves her? You think this makes her untouchable? Everyone here knows she doesn't belong in your world." Emily's chest tightened, fear flickering in her heart. But Alexander didn't flinch. His hand tightened gently around hers, his voice calm, but carrying the force of an undeniable truth. "Then maybe it's time the world changes its idea of who belongs." And with that, the ballroom, the whispers, the cameras, all of it seemed to fade into silence, leaving only the sound of Emily's heartbeat echoing with a newfound hope. The night had shifted in a way Emily could never have imagined. The ballroom, once filled with laughter and polished masks, now buzzed with the raw tension of what had just unfolded. Alexander's name echoed in whispers like a spark setting dry leaves ablaze. Everyone knew now. He wasn't just a stranger who had stepped in to save her pride. He was Alexander Reed, the billionaire CEO who could silence a room with his presence. But when Emily looked up at him, she didn't see the man whose face graced magazines or whose decisions shaped industries. She saw the man who had reached for her hand when she was trembling, the man who had shielded her when her ex tried to tear her down, the man who had told her she was stronger than she believed. For the first time in years, she felt seen not as a burden, not as someone to be pitied, but as a woman worth standing beside. And yet, the weight of reality pressed hard on her chest. Alexander's world was a fortress of power and scrutiny. She had spent most of her life avoiding judgment, and now she stood on the edge of it, cameras flashing in the corner of the ballroom, capturing every stolen glance, every whispered word. Could she really step into that world without being crushed by it? As if sensing her thoughts, Alexander leaned closer, his voice quiet enough for only her to hear. I know this is overwhelming. I didn't plan for tonight to go this way, but I won't regret a single thing I did. The only question is, do you trust me enough to take a chance? Her breath caught. The way he said it wasn't commanding, wasn't a demand from a man who could have anything he wanted. It was vulnerable, an offering. Before she could answer, Mark's voice rose from the crowd, bitter and sharp. She'll never fit your life. You'll see soon enough, Alexander. She's nothing but a mistake. The cruelty of his words might have broken her once, but not tonight. Emily turned to face Mark, her voice steady even as her hands shook. No, the mistake was ever believing I needed your approval to have worth. You don't define me anymore. Not tonight. Not ever again. The room erupted with a quiet cheer. Not applause, not celebration, but the collective relief of people watching someone finally take their power back. Alexander's eyes softened, pride flickering in the way he looked at her, as though he had always known she had this strength inside her. He reached for her hand once more, this time not to steady her, but to lead her forward. Let's get out of here, he said with a small, almost boyish grin. And for the first time that evening, Emily laughed. Real, unguarded laughter. They slipped out of the ballroom together, the night air cool and refreshing as they stepped onto the quiet streets. Away from the noise, the whispers, and the flashing lights, everything felt simpler. He turned to her beneath the glow of the city skyline, his voice lower now, almost tentative. Emily, I don't know where this leads. I only know that I want to see where it goes. With you. She looked at him, at the man who could have chosen anyone in that ballroom, but chose her instead, and her heart whispered the answer her lips had been afraid to give. Then let's see. For the first time in years, Emily wasn't running from her past. She was stepping into her future. And standing there beneath the New York night sky, with Alexander Reed's hand holding hers, she realized something she never thought possible. Sometimes, the life you've been too afraid to imagine finds you when you least expect it. And just like that, the story that began with desperation at a crowded party ended with the beginning of something far more powerful. A love that refused to play by anyone's rules but their own. I really appreciate you watching this story all the way through. If it touched you in any way, go ahead and hit that subscribe button because I've got plenty more heartfelt and dramatic stories coming your way. And before you leave, don't forget to check out the next story waiting on your screen. It's one you definitely won't want to miss.